Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar, Teens and Adults with Asperger Syndrome or High Functioning Autism, Building Positive Futures with Dale Munro. My name is Matthew Lay, and I will be your host for today's session. Now, for those of you who don't know Dale, he is in private practice and affiliated with the Redpath Centre in London. He works with families, individuals, and couples, exclusively those on the spectrum. Now, he's worked in the field of autism and Asperger syndrome for 43 years and is the most published and recognized experts in this country on the topic. Now, few professionals have worked this extensively with teens and adults, and that's why we've got Dale with us today. Based on his publications and his vast clinical experience, Dale will focus on innovative clinical and support approaches. Now, it's Dale's goal to improve the lives of these remarkable individuals who are generally underserved. I know you're going to get started, but before we do, I got to take you through a few logistics, and I'm going to draw your attention to the webcast console. Dale and I are coming to you live over video, and beside us is the PowerPoint slide deck. It's going to be transitioning as we go through our discussion, but if you want, you can download the PowerPoint in both English and French from the resource section at the bottom of the screen. That resource section also houses links and documents that you're going to find supportive of today's discussion and on autism in general. Now, directly below us is the Ask a Question box. Throughout the presentation, we want you to submit your questions and comments about what we're discussing, and they're going to come up to me on my iPad, and I am going to aspire to get you answers from Dale. We got a lot of people online today, as we always do, and we may not get to all the questions in the hour we've got with you. The commitment that Autism Ontario and Dale have made is that we will go through the questions and get you back an FAQ after the fact. Now, last but not least, if you run into any issues with the technology, please click the support button and someone from our team will get back to you. And with that off my chest, let's get started by welcoming Dale to the Autism Ontario desk. Dale, thanks for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Those who've watched this before know I like to get started with a very broad question. And let's start off talking about some of the myths that are associated, the stigmas associated with adults and teens with ASD.
Well, I think the most common myth I hear is that these folks are always aloof and uninterested in other people. And that's BS. We're dealing with people that really need people in their lives. We're dealing with people who need relationships, and they're very interested in other people, but they have to do it on their terms. Yeah. They have to do it in their own inimitable way. And I think that one of the other myths we say is they have no eye contact. Well, most adults and late teens on the spectrum do have pretty good eye contact, if not really good eye contact. Some people hear better when they don't look you in the eyes. They're better if they look off away from your face. They actually hear better. If they look at you, it kind of gets in the way. But and I guess two of the biggies are that these folks can't benefit from counseling. Of course, that's BS. Yeah. And that's a Bachelor of Science.
Yes.
And there's no chance for career success. And of course, there are many successful people on the spectrum and many young people that I think have a great potential that way.
And we're going to talk about that today, a lot of the successes that you've had and sharing that. But beyond these myths about them, we know that there are some specific strengths that generally those on the spectrum have. What are the strengths that if we're not aware of, that we should be looking at?
We're dealing with some of the brightest, some of the most creative, unconventional thinkers in the world, and these are the people that have got a really good potential for the future to do really neat things. I think that the sense of humor of the people, it's often kind of a dry, sardonic, intellectual humor, is a tremendous strength of these people. I think that the courage of the people that I work with is enormous. It takes a lot of work sometimes just to go out in the daytime and to face the rigors of university, college, whatever. And I think that just the thing is that these folks are very persistent and focused. And if you get them, say, as university professors, they may be 6 years old and they know every country in the world. As a 26-year-old, they may be a wonderful university professor in geography. Yeah,
exactly. Now, with these myths, oftentimes what we find are those on the spectrum are often misunderstood. That's why we have the myths, and alone. And what's the impact of that?
Well, I think that we have people that are facing mental health problems because of isolation. We're dealing with people that, some of them don't want to finish school. They're just not into school. They learn so much better outside of school. But, a lot of times they're very alone, and, therapists don't want to work with them or don't know how to work with them. I run into a lot of problems with professors at college and university that just don't get it. Yeah. So it can be a very, very isolating type of way. But, the young person may not want to drive a car, and most young people do.
Right.
Although Sheldon on Big Bang Theory says that he's too evolved to drive a car. But basically, we're dealing with people that are misunderstood and families that are frustrated and don't know how to support their children properly sometimes.
So, in your 43 years, and this is exclusively what you've done, when do you usually get the call, or maybe why should you get the call as a therapist?
Well, maybe it's who the call is from sometimes, too. I think that sometimes the call is from the wife of the person on the spectrum, and they're having marital problems, or she's trying to understand how her partner is, why he's acting the way he's doing, or it could be a female too. The one thing you need to know is that in the old days we used to say there were 4-to-1 ratio between males and females. Now we're starting to see it's more like 3-to-2, and people like Simone or Rudy Simone is saying it might be almost equal men and women on the spectrum. But the typical problems I run into are young people that are failing at school, or underemployed or not doing well in the job, marital discord between the person and his or her partner. I deal with young gay men and women who, are very isolated and don't have much of a support network. Or people on the spectrum that want to become better parents, and they want to get better at it, so they come to me for that reason. And sometimes the client really, for me, is the mom and dad of the person. They may be 40 years old, the person on the spectrum, but their mother and father are still unsure how they should deal with the situation.
These are reasons they do come, reasons you see. These are the reasons why you think they should be in the first place, or?
Sorry, tell me again.
Well, I'm saying these are the reasons that you see. These are why people are generally coming. But are these things that people should be looking out for and seeking out a therapist like yourself?
I think so.
Okay.
And I think that there's a few of us. The Red Pass Center, everybody affiliated with that here in Ontario, is one great place to go to. And even if you want information of a therapist in your local community, that might be a place to go to, or we do it ourselves. But these are the reasons people are coming to us.
People will remark when they take a look at your second slide, I think it is, or when they download the deck, that it wasn't an agenda that you had planned today, but a mission.
Yes.
You are very passionate about what you do, clearly, and you've got a series of goals that you want to put forward. Goals for parents, for healthcare practitioners, and the goals, I guess, that you look to implement in your day-to-day practice. The first goal that we are going to talk about is going beyond the diagnosis. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think the one thing people need to understand is that there's about 4 different adult patterns I see in people that I work with. Some people have a very severe mental health problem on top of their autism.
Right.
And those folks really struggle and need a lot of help. One group are people that are, maybe have a university college degree, and they're quite dependent on other people and don't have a lot of life skills. And so a lot of those folks are, almost behave in a similar way to people with more severe intellectual disabilities. Yeah. Another group of people are out there working and coping and doing pretty well. And they come to us just like the rest of us when we get depressed or we have marital problems or whatever. And there's a few people that are coming to us that are the well-educated professionals. They're the absolute top people in their field, and they run their own businesses. And that's about 30% of the people that come to us for counseling. But one thing people need to know about diagnosis, almost half, over 48% of people in the province of Ontario that get their diagnosis get it after age 21.
Wow.
So a lot of these people have had no help at all when they were younger.
Right. Okay, so one of the other goals that you have is being, as you say, the most positive person in the room. This seems to go without saying, but you're putting it front and center today.
I put it front and center for this reason. People on the spectrum, our whole field has been haunted by history.
Yeah.
We've had very, very unethical people that have talked about theories about how parents have caused their children's autism, and that's pure BS. We have a field where, almost every significant event and service in our field has come about because of individual and family advocacy. And the other part of this is people on the spectrum are very sensitive to criticism and negativity.
Yeah.
And these are people that, really need positive people around them. And I always say that professionals and parents should show unflappable optimism just short of being annoying. Yeah. Because it's very important for these young people. And people I see could be 18. We deal with 70-year-olds on the spectrum, too, that just got their diagnosis. So we're dealing with a wide range of people, although the majority of people I see are 15 to 30 years old.
Yeah. A reminder to our audience throughout the presentation, please submit your questions. I got my first one, and I think we talk about this later, but I'm going to get to it anyways. You mentioned isolation and I think causing anxiety. Are there other common mental health concerns that occur with those on the spectrum?
Well, I think the biggest one is anxiety.
Okay.
It's huge. And maybe 80% or more of the people, Tony Atwood says, suffer from anxiety. Eating disorders are fairly common. Okay. And I was dealing with a young man this week that's about 6'3" and about 90 pounds.
Wow.
There's often attention deficit and hyperactivity that's in addition or part of the Asperger's. Substance abuse is small percentage, but it can be a significant problem if someone abuses alcohol or abuses even marijuana, smoking up several times a day, things like this. And obsessive compulsive disorder can be quite common in these folks. Yeah. And so, basically, the really serious situations are lots of people are out there with autism that are functioning quite well as adults. Right. But when there's an additional mental health problem, it gets more complicated.
There's a question on this that when we went through our pre-interview we talked about that I had never heard before. It's a clinical question, and it is, who is your autism hero? What do you mean by this?
Well, this is a question I ask people because you'll have people come to your office and say, I don't have autism, even though they've had 3 different professionals diagnose it. And I'll say, okay, let me ask you a question. Who in history was your autism hero?
Right.
And they'll say, what the heck are you talking about? And I'll say, well, there's people, that it's hypothesized had autism, such as Albert Einstein. He turned out pretty well.
Yeah, I would say.
There's people out there like, Bill Gates that has autistic tendencies at least. He turned out okay. Yeah. And there's people out there like Laurence Olivier, the famous actor that Tony Atwood says almost certainly had it. We know Susan Boyle, the singer, has come out with the diagnosis. Seinfeld came out recently. Dan Aykroyd came out. And one of the people said, we wouldn't have Ghostbusters, we wouldn't have Microsoft, we wouldn't have, all kinds of things if we didn't have people with autism. Right. But I try to get the person, I'm trying to, I'm trying to just jiggle their thinking a little bit to kind of consider the fact that autism isn't like a life sentence to drudgery. It can be the reason that you're successful.
Right.
I always try, as a therapist, to turn the autism to the person's advantage.
And how does it work? Is this a well-received process, I guess?
I think so. I think that what people tell me is they say, Dale, you get it. You speak our language. Right. And I think that by understanding, some of the issues, the negativity that the person's been through, I try to be very succinct when I speak to people. I try to be more literal. I'm a little more blunt with people on the spectrum because they understand that and they actually trust that more as long as it's not harsh. Yeah.
Okay, well, if you're looking to speak autism, this is a good place on the Autism Ontario desk. And in the past here, we've heard about a very, very common problem. Folks on the spectrum are 9 times more likely to be bullied in their lives. Talk to us about what the goal that you want people to become more aware of bullying.
I think parents and professionals have to be willing to ask the question, what kind of bullying, exploited past has each person lived through? Yep. Elementary school. One of the interesting things is when I've interviewed people and done videos with people, I found some of them had a much rougher time in elementary school than they did in high school, although some people have very rough elementary, high school. But even into college and university. I was dealing with a college student recently, last 2 or 3 years, that I'll call Jonathan, not his real name. And he had people sliming his door, sending him texts that were very, very negative, calling him retard, quote. And finally, the worst thing they did, I think, on top of all these other bad things, was they called the police on a 911 saying he was trying to commit suicide.
Oh my. And
he was actually in his residence simply working on his homework when the police knocked on his door. But they were just, there are people out there that are predators that go after these. They try to isolate these young people. Okay. And so as a clinician and as a parent or family member, it's important to understand the negativity, the abuse that the person's been through, because they can be somewhat traumatized or at least highly anxious because of this. Okay.
I think we dealt with my next question. I was going to get into mental health concerns. Have we left anything uncovered there?
I think you almost have to look at the full range, but anxiety is the big one.
Right.
And I think that if we can reduce, I guess the flip side of this is what causes this. These young people, as they get older, get so isolated sometimes. I'll have someone, say 19 years old, a university student, come into my office. They do not have one friend in the world.
Wow.
And so just the isolation, and that's where therapy can help as a starting point to help you start getting connected with people again.
Okay. Got another question from our audience here. It's looking for your advice. They have a big teenager at home, and hygiene is a struggle. Do you have any strategies to support getting him motivated and understanding why taking care of himself is important?
Well, the hygiene is an issue for some of the people. The biggest thing is don't get into a power struggle with the person over it. Keep it basic. One thing is sometimes parents and families have too high expectation. 50 years ago, people didn't shower every day.
Yeah.
And so if it's gone on for 3 weeks, which I've seen, there has to be ways. But always start out by saying, what are the sensory issues here? What sensory issues are going on? I deal with people that can't stand the feel of water on their skin. Is this what's going on there? Is the person deeply depressed? Do we need to have them assessed to see if either therapy or medication or some other method, are they so isolated that they've given up?
Yeah.
Can we get someone involved to kind of get them reconnected? At school, can we get them maybe a buddy that can kind of meet up with them a couple of times a day just to see how they're doing, spend a few minutes with them? But the biggest thing is if families get into too big a battle over hygiene, it's going to be a bigger problem. And I think there's always a reason why people behave the way. I would check out the sensory side, I would check out depression, and I would try to find another way, or have maybe a brother or sister rather than the parents talk to them. Sometimes brothers and sisters can tell the person to knock it off and get cleaned up. And but I think it's important to not get into a full-on battle over it. Because if you get into a battle with a person with autism, they always win, which means everybody loses.
Right. People come into your office for the first time, maybe diagnosed at 21, they're in there at 25 or 26 for reasons we've already discussed. How do you know if there's going to be a prognosis for improvement? What's your barometer?
The biggest barometer is how much support they get, positive support from their family, their mom and dad, their grandparents, their brothers and sisters. I've seen so many people that have, say, been suicidal, say, at age 16. By the time of 25, they're really starting to get their act together because the family stuck with them through the rough times. Okay. And I think that another issue is if they have at least one friend. if they have at least one friend, I know their prognosis is going to be less therapy and a quicker recovery. I think, do they have a nonviolent history? If they've shown violence in the past? Some families will come to me and say, our son is causing us so much trouble. He's just such a difficult guy. And I'll say to him, does he abuse alcohol or illegal drugs? No. Does he have a criminal record? No. Then I said, he's already 2 steps ahead of a lot of the young people I see out there. And so no criminal behavior, no substance abuse. Some people come in and they're proud of their autism. They say, I got my diagnosis and I tell all my friends about it. Other people are absolutely ashamed of it. Yeah. But if you're feeling okay about it, not worrying about it, those people have a much better prognosis. Therapy is usually a lot quicker with those people.
Parents looking at this looks like their son, daughter, loved one, good candidates for therapy then?
Yes.
Yeah.
And are they willing to go for professional help? And, you know, there's an old saying in terms of therapy that the most difficult people won't go for therapy. If I can get a person, half the therapy is done just by getting the person in the door. Yeah. That just means that they're more open, they're ready to work on it. Sometimes it has to be a crisis that brings them in for help, but it's better if they can come in without a major crisis.
I got another question from our audience. How do you suggest support for a preteen whose parents have not disclosed to her diagnosis? And she's struggling with anxiety and social skills.
First of all, you know, families need to talk more openly about the diagnosis. Part of the problem is it's kind of like the emperor has no clothes. Right. And I think it's very important that, you know, people be a little more frank about this, even if the person yells at you. Teenagers yell at their parents sometimes. No big deal. That just happens. Fights happen as long as they don't get physical and really get out of hand. Yeah. But I really believe that families need to talk to their kids about diagnosis in most cases, because it becomes the elephant in the room if you don't. And if this young person's suffering from anxiety and social phobias or anything like this, we need to be frank about maybe why it is the person's acting the way they are.
Goes back to the root. Something that goes along with all of this is cognition, and a big word called executive function. What is it that people need to learn about that when dealing with folks on the spectrum?
Well, I think that it's important to understand that executive function is the reason that the person takes the 90-minute showers in the morning. Right. Well, it takes them 3 hours to get ready to school and ready for school in the morning. Because the person, because of the frontal lobes of their brain, the way they're wired, they just aren't as organized to start something and follow through and finish it quickly. Yeah. Everything there. Brenda Smith-Miles, a very well-known writer in our field, says that there's something you might call Asperger Time, which is it takes twice as long to do half as much. Right. And I think that you know, it's for parents and family members and spouses. It can be a really, really big issue. I heard of a doctor that got his diagnosis. And he was someone that his wife had to lay all his clothes out in the morning, drive him to work. His nurse and receptionist got him through the day just fine, and he was a great physician. His wife picked him up, drove him home, organized his time with the kids and their social events. She knew that she had to help him. And Tony Attwood calls this, some people need an executive secretary, someone that prompts them to kind of keep on target. Yeah. Run into it with homework and things like that. And there's a very good book out called Late, Lost, and Unprepared. And it's a book for families about executive function. And it's something that I think is a great resource, but Late, Lost, and Unprepared. And it's in the reading list that will come out for the audience at the end of this session.
Anything we reference that's not in the resource section that you can click on, access, and download at this moment on the webcast console will be sent to you by Autism Ontario following this event.
Again, just to finish that off, this is where electric organizers, charts on the wall can be really good. But a lot of times families, even, you know, and Tony Attwood talks about this a lot, even parents of older adults sometimes need someone to keep them on track. And then hopefully that older adult will get married, because there are a considerable number of people that do get married that are on the spectrum. And at that point, this partner will take over.
Right.
And we won't get into marriage today. I do a separate workshop on marriage and couples. But, you know, there can be some very successful marriages when someone's on the spectrum.
And along with this cognitive and what partners, parents, and loved ones need to understand is what you call the mind context blindness, or sort of the nuance, some of the social behavior nuances.
Yeah, mind blindness is, it was written, this is a book written by Simon Baron-Cohen, who's related to Sacha Baron-Cohen, the Barack guy. No, they don't seem to have the same world that they live in.
I would imagine.
But mind blindness is where you have trouble mind reading, picking up the intentions of other people. Can't tell if people are lying or being honest with you. And so this leads people to, you know, they're literally blind. Some people have face blindness where when they're looking at you, they're looking at one ear or maybe the corner of your mouth or maybe the top of your forehead. And they can't picture your whole, so they can't pick up the non-verbal communication very well. And I think that sometimes the person can't, you know, they don't pick up more abstract thinking like, let's toast the bride.
Yeah.
They're actually worrying that you're going to actually toast the bride, or she killed herself laughing, or, you know, things like, it's a loud shirt, that person. They think the shirt is loud. It makes a noise, you know. And so this is something that can be very joking around. It's really hard for some people on the spectrum to understand joking around. They feel like they're being teased, even if it's just, you know, silliness.
So recognizing that as a therapist, you know, you have to, or I guess as anyone, you got to rely less on those general physical cues that you give everybody else. Be more literal. Is that?
Be more literal.
Yeah.
Be more concrete. Be more just straightforward in language.
Yeah.
And I think that makes all the difference. And I think that the other thing for students at university and college, or even men and women working out in the workforce, it's hard to work within groups. And profs, one of my biggest complaints is against professors at university and college is that they expect group participation in courses. But what they do, if you want to help the person with Asperger's or autism, then it's very important that you give them a role within the group. What is their role if they have a group project? Don't just throw a project at them, because these people, some of them will never be good working in groups, and when they get out working in the workforce, they often will do jobs that are more private, like research or things like a lot of accountants and lawyers are on the spectrum. A lot of people that are scientists, some musicians, but they'll be doing things that maybe they have to work with groups, but they have their own role defined. Yeah. And that's what you need in university and college for these people too.
Not sure if it goes back to, you know, speaking literally or not, but I got a question here from someone. How do you support someone interpreting constructive criticism as rejection or negative feedback?
The number one thing is, first of all, family members give people too much advice, and they counsel too much. It's very important at a starting point is to listen more and families talk less. Mm-hmm. If you do say something to a person on the spectrum as a family member, as a professional, you speak more quietly, more slowly. You're succinct. Don't talk on and on. Be succinct and maintain a positive frame of mind. It's very important. A lot of parents talk too loud. If your voice rises, or as a professor at university, you know, or as a professional in your therapy room, if your voice gets too high, the person shuts down. They don't hear a word you're saying. Yep. If you want to be heard, you've got to speak more quietly.
Another one here, and this is interesting, because you've talked about the importance of friendship. If someone comes in to see you and they've got at least one friend, prognosis is better. You've also said you don't want to get into a conflict. The question is, my teenage son doesn't want to hang out with his friends. Should we push the issue?
Probably not. I'd find out if he's hanging out with people at school.
Okay.
If he's hanging out with at least one or two people at school, I wouldn't worry. We're often taught, Tony Atwood talks about this all the time, but kids that go to school are all peopled out by the time they get home. So they may not have a lot of energy then to get together with other people, including family members. They need solitude to recharge.
Yeah.
And I think that the one thing you can do is, if you're worried that the person doesn't have much contact at all with other people in their private life, what I would do is maybe the parents can arrange gatherings where they get, try to hook up a play date, if you want to call it that, with a friend or something like that. Kind of try to facilitate contact with other people. But the main thing is, if that person has gotten through the school day and is doing pretty well, they're going to be all peopled out by then. Yeah. And so most of their private time is going to be restoring themselves, private time, reading, maybe some time on the computer, and but they need that time to restore.
That's interesting. I mean, you talk about time on the computer. On this desk, we talked to a lot of professionals, educators, and we've heard a lot about the somewhat obsession with topics or obsession with electronic devices. But you think you have a goal here, which is to develop special interests like that and talents. Talk to us about what people need to know about this.
What I'm really saying here, and this is Temple Grandin, she's written a book called Developing Talents. But she talks continually about finding out what the person's interested in and building their life around it.
Okay.
And she said, for instance, I've seen her mother, Eustacia Cutler, speak, and she says that my daughter wanted to hang out in slaughterhouses and look at animals being killed. That was her interest. And now she's become probably wealthy because of that as an adult, because she's, maybe half the cattle chutes in North America she's helped develop. But it's important to develop talents around what the person's interested in. If the person, loves weather, some kids will watch the Weather Channel all day. Yeah. Maybe, getting in the weather field, maybe you'll see them on the Weather Channel as a reporter one of these days. If the person loves sports, some people, I get into sports, I'm a Leaf fan, okay? Feel sorry for me.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. But some kids are really into sports. Get them a part-time job at the local arena where where they can help clean up around, maybe help out around the ice. If the person loves cars, get them a job at a car wash, or maybe washing cars at a local dealership.
So you just said person, car wash, but before that we were talking a lot about kids. Diagnosis past 21, we've talked about that. This topic is teens and young adults. Do you have any examples of people focusing on these interests when they're already into adulthood and you seeing it turn out well?
Well, let's look at technology.
Okay.
I deal with people that run their own tech businesses, their consulting businesses. Some of the people are amazing in terms of finances. I know people that run financial companies. I know people, one person loved automobiles so much, he was the best car salesman on the lot. He sold more cars than everybody. He could turn on a switch. Some people tell you they'll turn on a switch. He could just sell one car after another. And so you take what they're interested in and you build their life around it. And so, and again, some of the musicians, how they've loved music as a child, and now they're professional musicians as adults. And so often there's one person I know that loves comic books. You'll see collections of comic books, movies. He runs a comic store, and where he's just kind of built his life around that business. One of the things that people like Rudy Simone and other people have talked about is basically, just developing those talents, finding those areas, and whatever the person's interested in, try to build. One person I know is into brewing beer. And I suspect if you look at Mill Street, or they're not the people I'm thinking of, but you think of all the different people. There are people probably working in every brewery that have a background in Asperger's or autism, and that makes them really good at what they do.
Wow. We hear a lot about issues with different senses and the way that it can impact those on the spectrum. You have a goal for what people should know about sensory awareness, and what is that?
Well, I think it's incredibly important for parents and for family members and for professionals to understand the sensory area. I have people that walk into my office and they turn out all the lights. Yeah. I allow them to. They know they can turn off the. I have two soft lights. They can turn both of them on if they need that. there's a clock that's right beside their chair. Some of them will pick up the clock and put it in, set it over the other side of the room. You have to be sensitive to the way the person views light, because lights can be too bright. They almost look like they're on fire sometimes for some people. Noise can be very distracting. Some of these young people can't, do homework at home if there's any music or noise in the background. Sometimes smells of food cooking. Some people can't stand the smells that are going on around them. And so some people can't stand touch. Sometimes brothers and sisters will touch them just to bug them.
Yeah.
And that touch will just be, they can't stand it. They don't mind deep pressure. You can almost, do rough and tumble with them. Yeah. But you can't touch them lightly. It can be very, very disturbing. And so, I had one young man who I'll call Muhammad, who ate meat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and wouldn't eat anything. Couldn't stand the crunchiness, the texture of the food other than meat. And he wouldn't go to the mosque to pray with the other men because there were too many people. He felt the crowd, he just couldn't handle the crowd there. And it was really upsetting his family because he was eating a lot of meat, including pork, if he could get his hands on it. Yeah. And he wanted to go to, he wouldn't go to the mosque. And so you can see how the sensory, and some people have kind of synesthesia where they smell colors. They can hear numbers. It's very bewildering because it's so complicated. They're trying to sort all this out, and they'll see words, but every letter in a word has different colors to them. Yeah. So it's really hard for them to, get through a day. So, what I really try to do, and there's Elizabeth Bradley, who's a psychiatrist here in Toronto. She talks about developing autism-favorable environments, where in the classroom, the person may have a place where they aren't going to be as distracted as much in the classroom. Some people, even in high school, have barriers, cardboard barriers, just so they don't pick up all the lights and noise and all the people. Part of it is having furniture you can just flop out on and relax in. Having lights that can be low. Making sure that some people can't handle handshakes. Yeah. And so I have people, I try to handshake people. They'll just say no. Sometimes I do the fake handshake where I go like this and I go, Anyway, I use humor a lot in therapy because if the therapy session's fun, half the work is done. Right. And so you also have to be serious sometimes also. But the whole idea, clothing, some of the women will wear masculine clothing because it's more comfortable. It doesn't mean they're gay. Some of them are. But some of them, it's just more comfortable for them. Or the colors. Sometimes the colors in the rooms have to be certain colors to kind of help calm the person. And, of course, things like diet, if we want to get into sensory, some people, foods, they work better on a lactose-free, gluten-free type of diet. It seems to bring down behavior problems. They seem to do a lot better than.
So net this out, excuse me, to net this out, it sounds like in your practice that you feel that learn from your patients and what are these sensory issues, try to enable them to get past them so you can get on with what you need to do. Yes. And also try and have an open environment for anyone new who might be walking through that door.
That's right. You want to design your therapy office, the person's home, the school setting, and even the work setting. One of the women I know, there's a new video that just came out this last year called Autism Grows Up. It's a Canadian video. And one of the people there is Heather, who has her PhD, and she has a swing in her bedroom, just like you'd have out on a tree, because she swings on the swing, and that helps her calm. So whenever she's getting too anxious, she swings and she calms. She wears about 3 different levels of earplugs. Okay. And so just a light earplug or a heavier earplug, how much she can tune out the sounds around her. And of course, some people wear noise-canceling headphones, which can be really helpful too. Yeah.
So just over 20 minutes left. Wanted to give you a time check there, and anyone who's listening here who hasn't been to therapy or hasn't recommended it is probably now seeing your enthusiasm and the things you've been talking about and thinking this might be a good idea. Talk to me about the role of psychotherapy.
Well, first of all, my son said to me recently, "You love those people that come into your office, don't you?" I said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "You have to enjoy the people, and it has to be something that you really see that this is a group of people that you can appreciate and not prejudge." I think these people are drowning, some of them, in terms of society. I'm talking about the teenagers and the adults here.
Yeah.
A lot of them are very, very isolated. And so the therapy is a way, you're almost throwing a life preserver out to them to give them something to hold on to. When a person comes into your office as a therapist, you better be the best host in the world. I have herbal tea, I have water. Again, they can adjust the lights, they can do whatever they need that way. They have full access to my computer. If they want to explain something to me, I allow them to walk over and use my computer, because I want them to feel that it's an alive place in the therapy room, not something that's really deadly serious. Because you have to build a trusting relationship with that person. And you have to speak autism, understand executive function, understand sensory, understand, talking more literally. You need to do that if you want to be successful.
Well, I imagine, that's a plan. Everyone walks in with it. But one of the things you often deal with are people with high levels of anxiety and anger when you're in your room. Talk to us about what we need to know about dealing with that.
Well, as just a context,
yeah.
I get almost everybody that comes into my office to watch The Big Bang Theory.
Well, it's a good show.
It's a great show, but it also has at least 5 people that are on the spectrum that are successful and pretty happy. And so, if I'm doing marriage counseling with someone, I'm going to have the spouse watch The Big Bang Theory just to understand that. Beyond that, when you're dealing with angry, anxious people, the therapist, again, should use quieter voice, speak more slowly, be more succinct, be a real listener to whatever they want to talk about, and maintain a positive attitude. And again, you'll hear me say that. People wonder, they almost hear me whisper when somebody walks into my office, because I'm going to try to make it sensory as comfortable as possible. I think that it's really important, too. You have to hug the person with autism, but not physically.
Right.
You have to hug them with your eyes, with the tone of voice, with your listening, and maintain a positive frame of mind. That can hug them even though there's no physical contact. And I think that, really, we have to make it so comfortable for the person that they want to come back.
43 years of doing this, clearly they've come back, and you've had a lot of success. But my question is do you have a process by which you collect data at all in doing this?
I do something, I haven't published it yet, but you'll have access, the audience will have access to it when you get your emails out. But I do something called subjective scaling, where I actually collect data most sessions. And if I see people a lot, I do more samples of data. But I really ask about 30 key points.
Okay.
And let me give you an example of it. Pretend you're the person that's come to me for help. And I'll say, over the last 7 days, how bored have you been?
How bored have I been?
Yeah, can you rate it on a scale from 0 to 10?
I'm going to say I've been 2 over the last few days.
Okay.
Yeah, 2.
I'll write that down. Have you been getting regular physical exercise this past 7 days?
I have not, sir.
No, none at all?
None at all the last 7 days.
Okay. That may be something we want to focus on.
I would say so.
Over the last 7 days, how frustrated have you been with your life?
I'm going to give that one an 8, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty frustrated.
How depressed and feeling down and sad have you felt this last 7 days? 10, very depressed. 0, not depressed at all.
I'm going to give you a 5 on that one, right down the middle.
Has there been have you had any suicidal thinking over the last 7 days?
No, I have not.
Okay. How much do you worry? 10, you worry a great deal. Last 7 days, 0, none at all.
About a 9.5 on that one.
And again, I have about 30 different questions.
Right.
Hopefully.
Do you ask them all every session, or?
Sometimes I only ask, if I end up with 0 session after session, I don't ask this question anymore.
Makes sense.
But I'll ask about their loneliness, how much they want to find a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a partner. But the final question is, how helpful was I to you today? And 10, I was very helpful. 0, it was a total waste of time. I get them to rate me almost every session. And but I take them through. One of the things I ask them is their sparkle. How much? I don't ask them, but you know, and I want to, let me just get off on this just for 1 minute, and then we'll. The old guru therapist always watched the eyes of the people that came in for therapy. Because when they first came, their eyes were dead and disillusioned and lost. But always watching the eyes as time went on, and they felt support, their eyes started to brighten, their mood started to lift, and they seemed to feel more hope. Because always watching the eyes, you know, are the passage to the soul.
Right.
And so I record sparkle and how much their eyes sparkle. I think of it as a quasi-empirical measurement.
Yeah.
And so this is something I record, and along with the other things. And again, people will have that they can refer to.
Okay.
And thank you for being such a good partner.
I answered truthfully and honestly. It has been a stressful past 9 days or so. I'm going to go to our audience for questions. My son is determined not to disclose his diagnosis to his supervisor at university, but his personal challenges result in situations that are completely misunderstood by his professors. And you've already discussed that whether or not it's disclosed, there are some challenges with professors. How do you balance privacy with needed support when the professors don't understand the challenges he's facing?
Well, you know, the truth is, this is the disclosure. Coming out to your professors or teachers is an issue that comes up all the time. Yeah. If the person is really, really struggling, I would try to encourage, but I wouldn't make them. It's still their final choice. It's still their business to disclose to, you know, the disability services at the university or college that, you know, that there is a diagnosis there on the spectrum. But, you know, it is their business. But I've seen people absolutely self-destruct, you know, not totally, but that they really go downhill emotionally because they won't ask for help and they're not reaching out. Professors need to know if that person's not doing well. I dealt with one young man who was the top high school student in his whole high school, and he graduated. He got into third year at university, and his marks started to drop like crazy, but he wouldn't tell anybody. And so he scraped through third year. By fourth year, he was in a major depression, and he came to me, and I told him that I thought he really should disclose so we could get some extensions on, you know, some exams and assignments and that type of thing. He finally did, and it saved his degree that year. Yeah. We got some permission that extended them from May. He didn't have to get his assignments until July, and by doing that, he got all his courses and he graduated. You
found that the schools are under, like, maybe on individuals, not so much, but the schools are very understanding of this at the university level?
Not necessarily. Some profs are really frustrating to deal with, and so it isn't easy. But I think that somehow it's, you know, if you can share this at least with disability services, sometimes they can go to the profs and talk privately and kind of mediate things a little bit. But secrets keep people sick. Yep. And especially if you're emotionally starting to regress, it's important that the person tells the professors or teachers if they can. Some people, though, it's still their business. If they don't want to tell, we can't force them to. Let's go back to therapy, go back to in the room. And one of the things that I've heard before, the importance of rules in working with people on the spectrum. Do you have rules in therapy or rule making? Is that part of what you do? Definitely. Yeah. Luke Jackson, you may, some of you may know, is the person that wrote Freaks, Geeks, and Asperger Syndrome. And he writes about the rules that people need just to survive as a teenager. And he says, don't invade personal space, don't stare at people, don't make sexist, racist, homophobic comments, don't hug or touch people unless they want it. And so there's some basics that I think are important, and even hygiene, that's where that hygiene question might fit into. Another rule, you know, people on the spectrum are rule-driven people. So once they get it established, they tend to follow things. Yeah. One of the rules I try to set up with people is regular physical exercise. And we know, I believe that therapists should prescribe exercise just like some doctors prescribe medication. and it should be an important part. It should be a rule that's built into people's lives. And Temple Grandin talks a lot about rules, sins of the system and things that aren't real problems, but society creates a few problems. But I think that the rules should be set out and can be established with people, and it can be really helpful. Yeah. The other rules I like to look at, and this is kind of coming into boundary setting, is that there's a great book called 5 is Against the Law. It's a little skinny book, but it's very useful for people to judge their own behavior and to set up some rules for themselves. I had the one young man that went up to the university from out of town, came to our city, and he'd stare at the young women up at the university, kind of creep them out, and they'd get up and moved. And he'd come in and tell me about this. And so I got him to rate his behavior on a scale from 1 to 5, and it came out of the book 5 is Against the Law. And I said, is your behavior threatening, or is it scary, or is it odd, or is it reasonable? And I got him to judge, and he said, oh, it's no big deal. And I said, no, actually, you could get arrested if you keep doing this. It could be criminal.
Yeah.
And I said, you're getting it into the scary and threatening level. So we got him to measure his behavior every week, every session.
Yeah.
And he finally says, I don't want to go up to the university anymore because it's too hard to work. I think I'll look for a job now. Oh. And I think that, but this is a good way the person can actually rate their own behavior and start to understand socially what's expected out there.
Now, is this book on our list, our reading list that will be going on afterwards?
Yes, it is. It's on the reading list. And again, it's called 5 is Against the Law.
As if someone knew, the question that came in just before you did that was, what are some things we can do to set boundaries? So I think you answered that inadvertently.
I think so. And just getting into boundaries a little bit more. This is one good way, okay. 5 against the law. Other boundaries are, sometimes we have to loosen boundaries and help people. Would you consider going to an Asperger support group? Would you consider that? Would you consider starting, joining an exercise group? Would you get a personal trainer? That way you're loosening their boundaries between themselves and other people. Other times you need to tighten boundaries. To give you an example within families, sometimes we have a 30-year-old woman that still lives with her parents and wants to go out with their parents everywhere they go and on their vacation. And the parents are going crazy because they need a break.
Yeah.
And so part of tightening boundaries is between the parents and the daughter. No, we're going to go on a vacation without you this time. No, I think we'll go out to dinner, just the two of us tonight. And it becomes an issue for me as a family therapist. Sometimes I have to help the parents develop rules so they can build a bit of a wall between them and their children.
Right.
We have parents that their children follow them to the bathroom every time they try to talk through the door, so they don't even get a break during a bathroom break. Yeah. So boundary setting is a huge part. And building boundaries between the person and bullies can be very important too.
Right. Now, we're dealing with young adults to adults. That's what we're talking about today. And something that's going to have to come out of there is sexuality. I know you've got goals for that. I'm going to ask that when you talk to them that you also try and help these parents who are saying that they've got sexuality, they're wondering what sexuality issues they should be addressing with their teenage daughter.
Well, it's hard to know for sure. Some
right.
people just don't have any information on menstrual hygiene or things like that. I think that the one thing that parents need to do is feel very comfortable when if they know that their son or daughter is masturbating. It's very common for both girls and boys. So that's masturbation. People need a sexual outlet too,
yeah.
And so masturbation can be a great way to have a kind of be able to express themselves without getting into any harm. I think that one of the biggest issues though is loneliness, and trying to help the person connect with at least one or two people. Again, support groups can be really good in terms of breaking through the loneliness. So that you don't try to hook up with people that maybe you don't want,
Yeah.
you don't. I think that, helping them that way. The other thing I think parents need to do is become very comfortable that the person may have a sexual orientation that they're not used to or ready for, and the son or daughter may be gay, lesbian, or transgender, and autistic. And so, that may be another issue. And I think that birth control and safe sex is, again, very, very important. I had a young man in my office recently, and he talked about having sex with his girlfriend, and I said, were you wearing a condom? No.
Yeah.
I was saying, it's very important that you practice safe sex. And parents can be really good. I think the first teachers should always be parents.
Yeah. But it's not dissimilar from those not on the spectrum.
Yes, it's very common.
Right.
The only difference is the person may be more of, could be targeted a little bit more because they're a little more socially awkward.
Right.
And so we need to protect that person. The other thing is for older adults, say you're 35 years old and never been out on a date, then it's important to consider maybe internet, using internet websites to meet a partner. Mm-hmm. On New Year's Eve 2 years ago, I got a message. I'd worked with this young man for 2.5 years, and he'd never been out on a date. And on New Year's Eve, I got an email with his wedding pictures.
Oh, wow.
And, I'd finished therapy with him, but he'd hooked up with this young woman, and they'd spent a period of time getting to know each other, and they finally met. And they just gotten married.
That's incredible.
And just about a month ago, I had another couple come in that had met on the internet. They got married. And if you go at it really slowly and carefully, which is the way to do internet relationships, and eventually meet, it can be a wonderful way to meet people. And who is better on technology than a lot of people with autism? So it's a good connection.
So time check here. We got about 5 minutes left, and a lot of content that I know that you wanted to get to. So I'm going to let you kind of draw the play for me and tell me where do you want to go with our last 5 minutes?
Well, I'd like to touch base just briefly on cognitive behavioral strategies.
Right.
I think that one of the things that's really important, we talk about cognitive distortions such as black and white thinking that we see a lot in people with autism, Asperger's, catastrophizing, making a mountain out of a molehill, things like that. Yeah. I describe that as ways our thoughts are playing tricks on us. And I've used that expression both with medical doctors on the spectrum, and I've used it with people that are less educated. And it seems to make sense. Throughout the therapy session, I'll say, I think your thoughts are playing tricks. You know how I've told you how your thoughts, but I think that's happening right now, And so I think that can be helpful. I think that
for therapists out there, do standard, thought journals and things like that. Does that work with those on the spectrum?
Thought journals work really well.
Yeah.
Writing a letter to the person you're angry at, but not sending it that's both a cognitive behavioral and a narrative therapy approach. Okay. And you'll notice what I'm talking about there. I'm talking about an integrated, you pull in any strategies that are ethical that might help that person. It could be narrative therapy, it could be family therapy, it could be cognitive behavioral, it could be even relationship-based. I won't use psychoanalytic because that's too loaded, but more relationship-based therapy. These all can be very helpful.
And you go into great detail in the paper that's going to be sent out to everyone after this about bringing it all together.
I want to talk about anger just for a minute, though.
For sure.
And it's the biggie. Tony Atwood says when we get anxious, our IQ drops 30 points. When we get angry, our IQ drops 60 points, which I always thought was kind of brilliant, in kind of as a system. I tell people on the spectrum do not want to feel like they're stupid because a lot of them are bright, but they've been treated like they aren't very bright. I say if you want to stay really intelligent, don't get angry, because it'll drop your IQ for at least the time that you're angry. And so I try to get them to use visuals. Visuals work really, really well with people on the spectrum. I use this stop, think, and go. When you're getting really angry, you should have a red light in your mind that's starting to say, be careful. The amber light says, think about the consequences. You get in trouble with the law, get in trouble with a girl. And the green light is, get the heck away from each other. The Munro 1-minute rule. If you're having an argument with someone and it lasts more than 60 seconds, get away from each other. That means I often ask the man to go outside for a 15, 30-minute walk, go to a different part of the house if you got a big house, but totally get away from each other. Because in the middle of an argument, nobody's listening anyway.
If that doesn't work, do you have other strategies that you put in play? Well,
there's many different strategies. I really believe in meditation, mindfulness training, yoga, things along that line can be very helpful to teach the person to find ways to calm themselves for emotional regulation.
You have success stories of that with adults on the spectrum?
you know, it's a big part of every person that comes in my door. I try to use that. But you've got to find what works for them.
Right.
Everybody has their own unique way of doing it. But finding a way to become more calm and present-focused and more alert is very important. There's a lot of things in terms of acceptance and commitment therapy that can be very helpful here around mindfulness training. And accepting those things you cannot change in life is a wonderful therapy approach. Accepting that you have a diagnosis,
yeah.
Accepting that you have maybe, you know, you haven't gone as far in school as you wanted to, but you can find other successes. Things like that can be important.
Sir, we did not get to as much as we wanted to today, but it was a great discussion, and clearly there's a lot here. What I'd like to give you an opportunity to do with the final minutes that we have, and we apologize once again to everyone, we weren't able to get to all of your questions, is basically give us your final thoughts on the subject. What do you want everyone to walk away with today?
Well, I think the biggest thing I want people to leave with is to understand that people with Asperger's and autism can be very successful adults.
Yeah.
There's lots of struggles. Some people do better than others. But people with autism, I think it can be a competitive advantage. And if you look at Specialist Stern and some of the people that are trying to look at jobs for people on the spectrum, employment can be a possibility, and really good employment for some people. Marriage can be a possibility. Lots of people don't get married, but lots of people do. But there are advantages to having autism, and one is, you know, the courage of people and persistence is really powerful. Part of it is the fact that the person can be so focused and can have an unconventional way of doing things that a lot of employers need if you want to think outside the box and be creative in the future. And that many of the people with Asperger's and autism, Temple Grandin says, I'm happy just the way I am, don't change me.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at some groups, they're trying to do science to get us, you know, kind of rid ourselves of autism, it seems. A lot of people with Asperger's autism are very upset by that. They say we contribute a lot to society. And I think that the sense of humor, the greatest sense of humor in the world, I think, comes from people on the spectrum. And I'll just give you my Christmas card I got a few years ago. Mr. Dale Munro, address London, Ontario, Earth, solar system, Milky Way galaxy, just this side of heaven. And Canada Post did deliver it, which I give them a lot of credit. But, you know, to conclude, I just want to say, respect the intelligence of the folks. Sometimes they'll challenge. They say to me sometimes, are you smart enough to be my therapist? You have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Speak more quietly, more slowly, more succinctly, and maintain a positive frame of mind. Hug people with your eyes, your tone of voice, your listening, and your positive attitude. And learn to speak autism. If you're a parent or a professional, learn to speak the autism language better. And I'll leave you with the words of Temple Grandin. If the world was left to you socialites, we'd still be in caves talking with each other. And because of people with Asperger's autism, we have technology and we have inventions, we have wonderful art. And for me, I work with the greatest people in the world.
Dale, we can tell you have a very positive and a very refreshing approach, and it's been great talking to you today. This, unfortunately, is all the time we have. I know some questions are gone unanswered. We're going to get back to you with those. For any of you, and I can't imagine there's many, who think they've got other people who would benefit from watching this presentation, it'll be online come Monday on the Autism Ontario website, so you can share it with anyone who you think might enjoy it. That goes for a lot of the other presentations that have happened on this desk, all things that will help you speak autism better, as we've talked about today. So on behalf of Dale, myself, and Autism Ontario, I want to thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you next time.